Well, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County Representative Position 1 Forum for Ledge District 39. I'm your moderator, Karen Madsen. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County. Candidates for Position 1 representative for Ledge District 39 are Sam Lowe, KARL de Jong, Claus Johns, and Robert Sutherland. As always, the League has invited all candidates. Robert Sutherland is not joining us today. The League thanks all the candidates for running for office, for your willingness to serve the community if elected, and for participating in this forum. It's the policy of the League to be nonpartisan. That means that we don't support candidates and we don't support parties. However, we do take positions on issues which we've studied and upon which we've reached consensus. Ground rules for this forum were sent ahead of time to the candidates. Candidates have agreed to abide by the stated rules of decorum and will refrain from interrupting, from personal attacks or disruptive behavior. These rules will be strictly enforced. Regarding the question and answer period, questions have not been shared with the candidates. We thank those who sent us recommendations about local issues to form the basis of our questions. I will pose the questions. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. Less or more time may be allowed for selected questions. If there's a change in the time allowed for a question, I'll state this change clearly. We're using a countdown timer visible to all the candidates. It shows elapsed time, alerts the candidates when there are 15 seconds left and when time is up. Time limits on questions and answers will be strictly enforced. When you see the timer turn red and hear the chime, you are out of time. I'll change the starting order for each question, rotating through the candidates to ensure a random and a fair sequence. The order for the first question will be Mr. Johns, then Mr. de Jong, then Mr. Lowe. On the second question, Mr. de Jong will lead off, followed by Mr. Lowe, Mr. Johns, and so forth. So here we go. Here's the first question. Mr. Johns, you are up, and here is the question. What qualifications and experience make you a strong candidate for this position?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to do a land use acknowledgement. I'm speaking to you from the ancestral homes of the Sauk, Suattle, and the Upper Skagit tribes. I have been teaching business education in Skagit County for the past 10 years. And prior to that, my first life was I was a financial analyst with Ford Motor Company for about 20 years. So the combination of business and education serves well in government because public education is one of our largest budget items. Actually, spending so much time in a classroom, I've become quite good at listening, and I like to make certain that everyone's treated with equity, dignity, and respect, and I look forward to the opportunity to serve the people who live in the 39th LD. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Mr. D.
Well, thank you. I'd like to start off by thanking the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County for taking the time today. They're putting aside dinner with their families as we are, and because it is important to be involved in our communities and who will be our representative for our voice. My name is KARL de JONG, and I am a former city council member here in Cedar-Woolley, and I'm married. We have 8 children. 5 of which are internationally adopted. And of course, we have 2 lovely dogs, 2 lovely cats. I've been involved as a community organizer, community activist for a very long time, for over 4 decades. And I think that comes from my family history of my father's family not being able to leave the Kingdom of the Netherlands before the occupiers came. And they survived that occupation and came to this country for a better life, knowing that this was the country that they wanted to be in, and knew that their axiom of love thy neighbor would be appreciated, and something that they invoke every day and instilled in my sister and myself and my cousins. And that's why I'm running, is an extension of community service here in the 39th Legislative District. be honored for your vote. Please check out KARLforchoices.com.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lowe?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. I also want to thank my opponents for participating tonight. One of the things that makes me a strong candidate is community service. I serve in my local Rotary Club. I've done roadside cleanups, service projects, painting the interior of the Granite Falls Boys and Girls Club. I've been a successful small business owner. We need somebody in this position who knows how to create jobs. I've also served on the Lake Stevens City Council, where I was president of the city council, and I was also chair of the county health district. Currently, I serve on the Snohomish County Council, where I've successfully served for the past 6 years. I've been reelected twice to this position, and last year I was elected by the highest percentage ever in the district for somebody in a contested race. I currently serve on the State Transportation Improvement Board. I'm the chair of that board and serve our state in that role. I'm also a Washington State Traffic Safety Commissioner. I was appointed by Governor Inslee to do that job. I have effective, proven leadership at the local, county, and state levels. I have a master's degree in organizational leadership, and looks like I'm running out of time. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you. Next question, Mr. de Jong, you'll lead off on this one, and we're going to be asking you about what you think the legislature needs to do. What are 2 or 3 major issues that need to be addressed by the legislature?
Jobs, jobs, jobs. We need sustainable jobs, and that is a family wage job. That's a job that brings respect to oneself and to the family and the respect of the community. We don't need folks working 3 jobs. We need 1 solid job. And we can do that by bringing back our hard-earned tax money to the 39th for infrastructure jobs, road jobs. As the other candidates have heard me say in the past, I believe traffic is a family value, because the more time you spend in traffic, the less time you have with your family. It's time to bring that money back and fix our roads and get people to work.
Appreciate that. Mr. Lowe, your thoughts?
Yes, definitely jobs. Our economy is struggling, inflation, the high cost of gas and goods. Our transportation needs to be addressed. The trestle, Highway 20, 530, Highway 2, Highway 522. Our constituents expect transportation to be taken care of. Tired of struggling, getting home from work and trying to get to kids' baseball games and soccer games. Tired of struggling trying to get to work. So we need our transportation needs addressed. Also, safety. Legislature last couple of sessions, and some of the things they did around public safety were good, not so good, and need to be. People need to feel safe and welcomed in the community, but we can't let the criminals continue to have free reign in our communities. We need to deal with the drug use and the fallout from the Blake decision. Fentanyl, it's out of control. It's destroying the lives of our young people and our families. These are all things that need to be addressed, and I look forward to addressing them this next year in Olympia.
Mr. Johns, 3 major issues needing to be addressed?
Thank you. Well, I think the big one that we need to address is women's reproductive rights and equal access to healthcare, because with the recent Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, we have the opportunity within Washington State to pass a constitutional amendment to protect their reproductive freedom, and we need to take a look at doing that. From the economy perspective, one of the nice things is Washington State has one of the strongest economies in the United States. So frankly, the governor and the legislature overall has done a pretty good job over the last decade, putting us in a pretty competitive position overall. I would also like to see something called the Healthy Workplace Bill put in. The Healthy Workplace Bill gets rid of some of the toxic work environments. And one of the things we heard a lot of is people left jobs during COVID and they didn't go back to them because of the way they were treated. And frankly, every American should be treated with equity, dignity, and respect every day, no matter where they work or how much education they have or how much money they make. So I think we have an opportunity to do a better job and take better care of our people. And finally, I think I'd like to do something with public education, because public education, for the size of our budget, less than half of Washington State seniors at high school are at grade level in English, math, and science. And so what I'd like to see is I'd like to see math, which are only about a third of the students are at grade level. I'd like to see a fourth year of math, just like we have a fourth year of English language arts currently. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Mr. Lowe, you'll take the lead on this question about homelessness. Please speak to ways that you would address homelessness.
Well, clearly the failed policies of Olympia are not working. Their answer is, as always, to continue to throw more money at it. One of the things to address is the missing middle housing. To address that at the county level, make that easier for people to attain home ownership. Working on behavioral health and helping those who are struggling is equally important. I think this can be done by partnering with our nonprofit communities, working on housing solutions with groups like Housing Hope, and come with the attitude of compassion. I do believe we need affordable housing, but I don't think it needs to be subsidized housing. I think we need to identify those in low-income housing. As I grew up in low-income housing in Everett, identify those that can move on to more sustainable housing, which would free up some of the government housing for others. Another priority is keeping our seniors in their homes instead of overtaxing them out of their homes. I think that can also help with our homeless problem too.
Mr. Johns, your thoughts on ways you might address homelessness?
Yes, thank you. Well, unfortunately, Washington State ranks 5th in the United States for homelessness. And we currently have about 22,000 homeless people on the streets. The city of Seattle has about 1,000 homeless people in downtown Seattle alone. Homelessness has been an issue now for about 150 years. So many political candidates have had a chance to fix this, and they haven't, because it's really a complex issue. Currently, they look at 5 dynamics that are feeding homelessness. The first one is the lack of income. I believe we should look at a universal basic income for people that qualify as homeless. The next is affordable housing. I think we need to look at affordable housing solutions, particularly repurposing commercial businesses to residential housing, much like the city of Chicago has done in their urban areas. Healthcare. I think that we need to look at the fact that Medicare is looking at being bankrupt in about 5 years. So we should be looking at universal health care. That'll take care of those problems that are driving people out of their homes. I think we should look at discrimination. And again, the Healthy Workplace Bill would help prevent people from being discriminated in the workplace for any reason. And finally, one of the problems they have is there's economic changes. So the job they had before may not be in demand anymore. And frankly, anyone who's homeless, I think, should qualify for a free community college education in the state of Washington. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Mr. de Jong?
Well, thank you. Something that I learned directly while serving on the city council here in Cedar Woolley is that homelessness can be directly impacted on any level of government, from the local municipality to the county to the state to the federal level. And that's by proposing and supporting affordable housing. And that's adequate mental health services and making room for all people in the district. If we just took a little more time to understand that homeless people are people and not just statistics, perhaps it would make it easier to find these solutions. Here's a policy I helped work on here in Cedar Woolley, was as a proponent of ADUs or tiny homes or mother-in-law apartments, either detached or attached. These increase the supply of houses where they need to be, not through sprawl into our agricultural areas, but also keeps the family nucleus together, because we can see emerging adults have the support of their parents, and those who need dignity in their retirement to be able to be close to family. So I think we should provide this affordable shelter for the people that are in need, and there's ways to do that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Johns, please take the lead on this question about hospital mergers. As hospital mergers happen with greater frequency, do you have concerns about limited healthcare options in religious hospital systems? What actions, if any, would you recommend?
Yes, I do. And frankly, abortion is clearly one of the issues that's come to the forefront where people are being denied access to healthcare. And, the thing is we have to remember that only women can get pregnant. So it's clearly a gender related issue that men can see it, but they can't understand it and feel it the same way. So frankly, I think that we need to understand that everyone should have access to medical care in the United States. We need a healthcare system in the United States, not a wealth care system that the people with the most money always have access to whatever healthcare they need. We have up to 40% of people in the state of Washington rely on Medicare right now, and that's expected to go away in as quickly as 5 years. So I think at the state level, we need to pass universal health care. When we pass universal health care, it needs to be in the law that that's a basic human right. And as a basic human right, you're not allowed to discriminate against people seeking any form of health care in a state hospital, period. If you look at public schools, for example, you can run a public school, but if you discriminate against students in a public school, the federal government pulls their funding from you. So in the case of the state of Washington, if healthcare was a basic human right and hospitals refuse to treat people, we just wouldn't fund them anymore by the same mechanisms that we don't fund people who discriminate against other people today in other industries. Thank you.
Mr. de Jong, your thought on hospital mergers?
Well, I pulled out my pocket constitution, and I'm looking right at the First Amendment, and the founders immediately talked about religion and the separation of church and state by saying Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's unambiguous. I think that they meant that if a hospital chooses not to offer a service, birth control, termination of a pregnancy, some share of that funding should go to the nearest hospital that does offer it. Thank you.
Mr. Lowe.
Yeah, I'm more concerned with the big money and the insurance companies who control our healthcare decisions. I think that's what my constituents are struggling with. I think this is an interesting question. The Seattle Times reported this weekend that 40% of hospitals are controlled by one religious organization. And I think instead of trying to attack one religious organization, we should look to incentivize more hospitals in our community and give the people that we represent more options for their health care and more opportunities to go to a clinic or a hospital in their local community instead of having to drive long distances to try to get to health care. So I'm more concerned about that. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Mr. de Jong, let's talk about education funding. You're up first. How could the education funding system be adjusted to continue to improve equity in public schools, even in the event of a local levy failure?
Right. I believe education right now is looking at one size fits all, this cookie cutter solution that's coming from Olympia. And it is my belief, and it's many of my neighbors' beliefs, that it shouldn't be the state, but municipality based. And students in Bellevue, for example, should not get the same funding as the students in Burlington. And equitable funding for each student is the goal. That's equitable, not equal, but equitable. I believe in supermajorities for bonds, and I do not believe, excuse me, let me make sure I'm clear on that. I think a simple majority for our bonds and levies are where the community should head. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Mr. Lowe.
Yeah, I have two kids who are teachers, and I have a third child who's graduating next year to be a teacher. So teaching is near and dear to my family's heart. I have 5 kids. Each of them excelled in different learning environments. And I think it's important that we look at the kids and look at their needs. The failure of these levies and school funding, at the end of the day, it ends up hurting our kids. I'm concerned about one-stop schools, kind of like Walmart with everything under the same roof. And I don't think that helps. I think we should let money follow the students and give them choices and options because each student is different. We talk about one group controlling hospitals, but yet we ignore the monopoly that the state has on schools and education. In the 39th district here, we see a great deal of parents pulling their kids out of public schools now more than ever. I think these parents have concerns that their kids' needs are not being met or addressed. And I'm not here to pick on school teachers. I've already shared about my kids being school teachers. But I think we need to have more options for our kids. It is about our kids. Let's get more private schools, more charter schools, and let's give our kids more options and let the money follow the student. Thank you.
You are welcome. Mr. Johns, your thoughts on school funding?
Thank you. Well, the state, as of 2019, was spending $11,500 per student for basic education. So when a levy fails, it's not like a student has no funding. It's the incremental funding above the $11,500 that we're talking about. So the next thing we need to look at is every school district is not managed the same. Many school districts are exceptionally well run and they have really, really good relationships with their local communities and they don't have problems passing levies. But we have other school districts that aren't run as well and they don't have as great a communication relationship with their local parents, and those parents are voting them down. So in politics, we talk a lot about local control. Well, if you take away the ability for a voter to vote down a levy because they're unhappy with the administration of their local district, you're really taking their voice away from them. So I don't really see the current situation as being as much of a problem. I think that if a school district is voting down a levy, it's really a vote of no confidence on the school board and their administrators. And they need to take a look at replacing those people or changing the decisions they make. That's a voter's right, and I don't think we should take that away from them. Having said that, I do think that some people will always have more money. I'm in a district that's 84% poverty, and our parents still pass all the levies, but there's communities like Bellevue that still will always have more money than us, and that's not really a crime. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Mr. Lowe, you'll take the lead on this next question. We're going to talk about the redistricting process. Are there changes you would support to the Washington State redistricting process? If so, what would those be?
Well, currently the redistricting process is a partisan process with two from each party in control. I think it's important after seeing this last redistricting process that we need some more people involved and make it not as partisan going forward. I don't think it was a very open process as it seemed like decisions were made behind closed doors. One of the things that I've thought about with this process is maybe make it a 5-part process where maybe we work on 10 precincts at a time on the legislative side and 2 congressional districts at a time, and maybe have them spaced about 2 weeks apart so that there's time to have hearings in those districts and maybe start at the 4 corners of the state and work towards Seattle and King County so that we can make sure that these districts are equitable, making sure that the different groups are being taken care of, and yet we don't have these districts that look gerrymandered and some of the other. I think be a good spot for us to start next year in Olympia.
Appreciate that. Mr. Jones? Mr. Johns, I'm sorry. Mr. Johns, you're muted.
Okay, there we go. Mouse problem, sorry. So redistricting, the way it went the last time, really has more of a political focus than a community focus. And I think that their heart is in the wrong place when you start out. This isn't the 1700s or 1800s where we have to do this by hand. We have computer models today, and we can model where people live and what communities that they're in, and we can redistrict things in a more geographically uniform way. So more squares and rectangles instead of long skinny districts or something that snakes across the state because you want to keep certain political people's addresses in them. I don't think that's the intent really what redistricting is supposed to do. Redistricting should make sure that communities stay together and that communities in close areas stay together that share roughly a lot of the same concerns. Because when you get these things stretched out too far, the communities on one end of your district may have completely different needs than the communities on the other end of your district. And how is one legislator supposed to split their loyalty when they're supposed to represent everybody equally? So I think in terms of being able to represent the people who live here, we need to have redistricting based on communities and not based upon political parties or what political party has a majority in there today, and then keeping that the way it is. And I think that put a lot of pressure on the people who did it this last time. And for the record, I want to say that was a thankless job and they did great. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Mr. de Jong?
Well, thank you. I think we're all looking for better transparency in the process. The executive sessions in order to caucus based on party really showed that the bipartisan method is broken and we should go to no partisan board. And I believe that is what the people wanted to do when they passed that measure statewide, to take it out of the hands of the parties and give it to the people. And I think there is a great example of doing those things through academia with folks that know demography, that are experts in this field. I don't know the nuts and bolts of redistricting, but I do know it matters. And that's why I testified before the redistricting committee to keep Cedar-Woolley whole and not to chop it up into different districts, because then we might feel that we have more representation, but really we don't, because we don't have the population base in Olympia to have that demand for when we have grievances that we need to be heard. So that's what I would like to see us do, is change more to the academic professional demographers. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I've lost my way a bit here. Mr. Lowe, did you have an opportunity to respond to the redistricting question? You did. Okay, thank you so much. I apologize. So with that, Mr. Johns, you take the lead on the next one, which is about Roe versus Wade. In light of the U.S. Supreme Court having overturned Roe versus Wade, would you support making any changes to existing state laws regarding access to abortion?
Yes, absolutely. I have always supported women's reproductive rights. I'm endorsed by the Skagit County Democrats, Snohomish County Democrats, and the 39th LD Democrats. And one of the primary charges that they've given me is to make certain that women's equality and women's rights stay on the front burner of things. So if we can get a Democratic majority, a 2/3 majority, we can pass a constitutional amendment in the state of Washington to make certain that women's reproductive freedoms are protected here. And, you know, as an American, I'm embarrassed that women do not have the same rights as men 200 years after we've passed all these laws to become a country. You know, it's like every step of the way, women have had to fight for equality. And 50 years ago, they were able to put something on the side and say, hey, at least this part of our life is equitable. Maybe not how much we're paid compared to men yet, but at least this part of our life is equitable. And now that that's been taken away, we need to put that back. We have a moral and ethical responsibility to treat men and women the same, period. And this should never have come up. It's access to health care. If we pass universal health care, we need to make certain that women cannot be discriminated against in any medical procedure. The only business that is between a woman and her doctor. End of story. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mr. Young. Mr. de Jong, your thoughts?
I believe women, it's a woman's choice, unequivocal, period. What we need, this is not a party issue. This is a personal issue. This is a family issue. It is highly personal. And we talked about a little earlier about the separation of church and state. If hospitals will not, or clinics will not provide because of those values, then we need to redistribute that funding from the taxpayers to places that will. And I support community-based health systems, and no type of criminalization is reasonable. And if we have medical tourists that come in to the state of Washington, you are welcome. You are welcome to the state of Washington. But they also have to bear some of the cost as the locals. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Lowe, your thoughts?
Yeah, obviously the Supreme Court has returned its decision back to the states. Washington State, in my opinion, will see no changes in this due to this change in federal law. I think it's surprising to me the amount of misinformation and the scare tactics that are circulating around our community on this subject. And so that's all I have to say on it. Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll turn our attention to climate change. Mr. de Jong, what legislation will you support to address the need for local responses to climate change, including through the comprehensive plans for the Growth Management Act?
What a great question. We need folks to work in their own communities to help clean up the community, because what we find, and this gets to homelessness and many other issues that were talked about previously, we need to have priority hire, apprenticeship utilization, and that needs to be directed into the neighborhoods that are brownfields, it's the only place people can afford to live, in order for them to get a living wage job, for them to, again, to have respect for themselves, respect from their family and their community, is to say, I helped clean up our neighborhood. I now have a job that I can provide for my family that is sustainable, economically sustainable. And as every person in construction would say, hey, I did that. And you know what that helps with is then the blossoming of that community. Because if anyone wants to come by and degrade that community, the people that live there that fixed it will be the self-regulators and make sure that they live in a great community. When we talk about comprehensive plans and growth management act, we see, again, that has to be more on the local level, because that is an indicator of how you're going to build. And we need to build in the correct places, not in sensitive areas and not in areas that take away our arable land for our farming and getting goods to market. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, sir. Mr. Lowe, your thoughts?
Yeah, during my time on the Snohomish County Council, we've been a leader in this area. We've been very proactive in addressing climate change as a council. I think the problem is we have all these rules and regulations that come down from Olympia that don't include funding, or what we call here in Snohomish County unfunded mandates. I think what happens many times is it makes it expensive to homeowners and to ratepayers and others. And so they end up cutting costs and making the problem worse. I do think there needs to be a better balance, and especially when we talk about balance between fishing and farming. This last session, there was a bill put forward to basically make much of the farmland in Skagit and Snohomish counties unusable to protect, in order to protect salmon. And so I think what was missing is there was not enough outreach to our farmers and to our agricultural community, and they were caught off guard on this. And I recently met with our agricultural community and talked about this with them. And when this came up in January, I tried to push our council to take a position against this, and they didn't, because they saw the word salmon. I don't think we can be scared of the word salmon. I think we all want to save salmon, but we need to work together. The other thing is we need to stop importing timber logs from South America, where their standards are not the same as here in Washington, so we can reduce our footprint by using local timber instead.
Thank you. Mr. Johns?
Thank you. In engineering, they have a saying that form follows function. So I think we need to go back to the question and have another look at it. So if we have a state comprehensive plan and the idea is to reduce climate change, people need to understand that we've been fighting about this since 1990. You can look it up. I think it's RCW 367840. And in it, they talk about certain counties with certain populations are required to participate in the plan. Well, if you look at the 39 counties in Washington, only 18 are required to participate. So I want you to think about this. That's less than half. So if you're running a football team and you're playing against an opponent and you allow half the football team to stay on the bench and only put 5 guys out there against 11, how effective do you think you're going to be against your opponent? Well, when our opponent is climate change, that's something that we can't afford to get wrong. So as much as I'm a fan of local control, everyone contributes to climate change. Everyone contributes to our economy. And we all have to have a plan that makes certain that not just the counties that are participating, but the counties that are not participating are not adversely affected by what we're doing in the other counties also. Everyone needs to have a seat at the table, and I think everyone needs to participate. So frankly, I think we do need to make changes, and I do think we need to make it mandatory that every county in the state has to participate in the state plan. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mr. de Jong.
Asked and answered.
My goodness. I apologize. I do recall your answer as well. Mr. Lowe, you get to go first on this next one. And we're going to be talking about violent firearms incidents and asking you, what do you believe are the 3 best ideas for reducing the likelihood of violent firearms incidents in our county and in our state?
Well, the tragic shootings that we've seen over the last few weeks and the past couple of decades is disgusting and sad. I think we can all agree to that. We've seen Congress try to go at this at the national level with their rules, and the rules that they're trying to do in DC are rules that are already here in Washington State. But when we talk about the best ideas, I think one of the ones is ULPs, unlawful firearm possession by our felons. I know here in Snohomish County, it's not being enforced. We just had a student get in trouble with a gun just a couple years ago, and then just recently shoot on a school campus. And that young person was in and out of jail in 12 hours with a $250 bail. And so I think if I want to look at something really closely, the ULPs, we need to make sure that that our streets are safe and that we're keeping guns out of felons' hands. And when they are caught with guns, that there's actually punishment with that crime, and that they're not just out in 12 hours. So we need to have leaders who are going to stop being soft on crime. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Johns, your thoughts?
I think that we should begin with looking at how we license people to have a firearm. It's like you have to get a learner's permit before you can set foot in a car, and then you have to basically take driver's ed or develop some proficiency. And when I go back to, I'm a hunter and a fisherman, and I learned firearm safety in high school, and the NRA actually came out, and we had NRA certified firearm instructors do that. And I think that people should probably have firearm safety before they can actually even walk in and buy a gun. In a perfect world, I think if we could do things over again, when you go in to buy a gun, you should actually send that to a firing range. And then you should have to go to the firing range and learn how to take it apart, do the maintenance, qualify for it. And before you can take it home, you should have a receipt for a gun safe so you have a safe place to put it. We look at all these ideas about banning assault weapons, and it's very popular every time we have one of these mass shootings. But there's hundreds of thousands of people in our country, if not millions, who have guns. And thousands of them have legally bought assault weapons and have never used them to commit a crime. They just like to have them. Why should we take them away from law-abiding citizens? I don't think we should do that. I think the other things we need to do is we need to expand our background checks. And I think we have to look at mental health and spend more money to screen out people, and people with mental health issues should not have access to a firearm, period. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. de Jong, I feel confident you haven't answered this one, so it's your turn now.
Thank you. I would like to just take a little time to talk about the horrific mass shooting that happened yesterday, and our hearts go out to those victims and to their families. And firearms are here in Washington State. Some consider it the third rail. I consider it very important to talk about. And we need to find folks that want to come to the table and talk about things. So I know personally, I have my own concealed weapons permit that I had to get a background check on. And I had to take a training certificate course from our, I took this one through the Cedar Woolley Police Department. So we can have all these laws for all the folks that want to follow the rules, that want to be good citizens. Unfortunately, there are those that don't. And what I've learned from doing personal ride-alongs with law enforcement is where criminals break in, burglarize, and steal firearms is where we have to have some, where we have to help ourselves by locking our firearms away in our cars to make sure that we're just not gone for a second and then everything's gone. So this is a big, deep conversation that's going to take more than a minute and a half. So I look forward to having it.
Okay, Mr. Johns, you'll take the lead on this next one. We want to talk about working productively. If elected, what ideas do you have for working productively with your staff, colleagues, and members of the public whose ideas are different from yours?
I've spent the last 10 years in a high school classroom surrounded by a room full of children who all of their ideas are different than mine. So that's my normal operating procedure. And what you do is you listen. I don't think that we spend as much time listening because we seem to be galvanized on our opinions and we seem to want to hear our opinions reflected back to us. So my understanding of your question is, what do we do when our own opinions aren't reflected back to us? Well, the first thing you do is listen. The second thing you do is you make certain that you don't attack somebody that has a different opinion than you do. They also are entitled to equity, dignity, and respect. And frankly, none of us are experts at everything. So frankly, we should spend more time hearing somebody's opinion and then go offline and find subject matter experts, not Wikipedia, and actually do a deep dive to find out what parts of the other person's position is right, because your own understanding may not be as up to date as the person you're talking to. And we need to be flexible. You know, every statement that I make is based on my understanding of a decision at the time I make it. I'm totally open to changing any position I have at any time when experience or evidence presents itself that requires a change. And I think we all need to be more flexible. And frankly, when it comes to dealing with people, kindness matters. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. de Jong?
Thank you. I've grown up and I've continued to have in my life surrounded myself with folks with different ideas because I find those people interesting. And I like to challenge ideas, and I like folks to challenge my ideas because that's where great ideas come from. As we learned in Sunday school, one face sharpens the other. And if we continue with the cookie cutter replicas of each other, of where we're in different parties and we'll never talk to each other, that's completely why we're not there in Olympia or any type of policy making body. We're there to represent people. And it's their voice that we're bringing to the table. And we need to bring those unique ideas and solutions from those discussions. They might be sticky subjects, but we have to agree to get together and talk. As I've used in other forums, the sign language sign for the United States is this. And that's what we need to do, is come together and find those solutions. I will work with anyone that wants to help make the 39th a better LD community and for Washington State. That is my promise.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lowe, your thoughts?
Well, we saw with the legislature this year with the transportation package that the majority party just ignored those who had a different idea or different opinion, and they passed a party line transportation plan. I personally have a tremendous bipartisan record over the last 6 years on the Snohomish County Council. And while being in the minority, passed some very significant things. One of them, the 3-2 vote for the Painfield Airport, 3-2 for the new courthouse remodel, saving taxpayers almost $100 million. And the way I did that is I went and met with our judges, and our judges meet for lunch each day, just the judges, none of their staff. And I asked if I could come along, and I sat down with them at their lunch, and I shared with them the options we had for the courthouse, which they were very aware of. And we worked together, and they supported my plan to remodel the current courthouse. And with that said, I'm not afraid to be the lone vote against something if that's the right thing to do and the ethical thing to do. But I have a great track record of working for everyone in my district, even if I don't personally believe in their cause. And I answer each one of my constituents' emails personally because I want to learn their issues and learn how I can work together to help them accomplish what they want to see accomplished. I want to bring that to Olympia too.
Thank you very much. We have a little extra time. I'm going to tuck in an extra question. Timer, please provide 90 seconds to answer this one as well. Mr. de Jong, you'll lead off. I know 90 seconds is not very long, so I bet there was a question or two you wished you had a little longer to answer. Just as a reminder, the topics have been homelessness, hospital mergers, education funding system, the redistricting process, Roe versus Wade, climate change, violent firearms incidents, and working productively with colleagues. Take 90 seconds, talk a little more about any of those topics. Mr. de Jong, take it away.
Well, thank you. Again, I would like to reiterate my appreciation for you coming together and putting these great subjects together. These are what we're hearing at the doors and when we're out talking to our neighbors about what is affecting folks. And it's important that we have a representative that has a temperament and that has is representative of the people that they're representing, and is also responsive. So I think what you have put together here has been a great, robust, comprehensive list. I would like to talk a little bit about working together, that we're to send people that will be representative for a better Washington and for a better neighborhoods. And I think working with our city council here in Cedar Woolley with the accessory dwelling units, which used to have a prohibition, and then putting in that sweat equity for almost a year working with the commissions that oversaw those laws in order to put together a really great plan that the council nearly unanimously approved. Was really indicative of a style of leadership, of bringing forth facts and taking the emotion out of it and out of the partisanship and saying this is what is best for our neighborhoods. And that's what we need in Olympia. Thank you.
Mr. Lowe, any additional thoughts on our previous topics?
You know, I talked about the Blake decision earlier, and I think we need leaders in Olympia who will actually lead and not just let things go by the wayside. I had a close personal friend die last year during July. His name was Jeff, and he died taking a pill, and that was laced with fentanyl. And the attitude in Olympia seems to be to legalize drugs, and we need that carrot and stick approach. And we've lost that with the current drug laws. And basically, we keep giving people struggling with drug use a free pass. And I don't think any of us want to see people locked up and throw away the key. But I think we need to have compassion. I think compassion is saying, hey, here's where the rubber hits the road, and you need to make a choice and give people a choice to either get treatment or face the consequences for their actions. And so I'm concerned about the drug use and what these drugs are doing to our young people and to our families. And, we're seeing some of the mental behavioral health issues that are coming from these drugs. And, it's taking a lot longer for treatment. And so we need to have treatment centers that are open longer, more months, so that people can get the help and treatment that they need. Thank you.
Mr. Johns, any additional thoughts on earlier topics?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for making this possible, and I'd like to thank the participation for the other candidates. We hope to make it very difficult for the voters to choose who's the most qualified. These are great guys, and I'm really enjoying campaigning with them. 95% of all of the legislation coming out of Olympia is bipartisan. So the fact that you're nonpartisan is setting a good example for the rest of us, and I thank you for that. In terms of an actual issue, one of the things a legislator is charged with doing is asking the tough questions and making the tough choices that people don't want to talk about. And frankly, universal health care is one. Social Security is projected to be insolvent in about 10 years, and Medicare is projected to be insolvent in only 5 years. That means Medicare is only funded for another 5 years when 40% of the people in our state rely upon federal funded programs for their health care. So I think we need to look at putting universal health care in place now so that we can get the bugs ironed out before the 5 years runs out and Medicare is no longer available to patch any of the holes. So as uncomfortable as it is talking about universal health care and going from a wealth care system to a health care system, I think it's a must, because how many local lives are we willing to lose if we get this wrong? This is entirely within our control. We need to pass universal health care now and take care of the people who live here. Thank you.
You're welcome. One last question for you. Timer, let's give these folks 2 minutes for this last one. Just like you don't have much time to answer the questions we ask, we don't have much time to ask questions. And I bet we missed one that you think is really important. That's what I'm thinking. Take this 2 minutes and answer the question. What additional issues or information would you like to bring to the attention of the community? Mr. Lowe, take the lead, please.
Well, I think the 39th district needs a representative that will not only take the right votes, but they'll actually work in the community on the issues that matter most to them. For me, the big one that I've seen is public safety, and that includes crime and drug use, and obviously transportation too. And one of the things that I want to say, since this is the last opportunity I have to speak, is the governor's emergency powers. They need to be reeled in, and they need to be addressed. And I think that's what the 39th district wants. Recently, I heard a representative from, I think, Moses Lake, Representative Dent, and he said there's two types of horses in Olympia: workhorses and show horses. A workhorse works on the issues and works hard for their constituents, and they work hard on good policy. The show horse, they look to the camera and they want to be on TV all the time, and they don't do the work that needs to be done. Basically, all talk and no action. And I believe I have the right leadership style of a workhorse. I believe I bring the right hard work attitude for my constituents to Olympia. And I want to thank both of my opponents that are here tonight. We have been in several different formats over the last several weeks, and they've been very respectful to all three of us. And I appreciate the opportunity to work through the issues together, even though we haven't had the opportunity to work together on issues. And so I appreciate their leadership. I appreciate them stepping up to run for office. And I really look forward to hearing from them as constituents so that we can see our community here in the 39th district be a better place. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Johns.
Thank you. One of the things I'd like to talk about is affordable housing. And an example of the humanness of people who run for office. All of us were at a candidate forum earlier this year, and they talked about House Bill 1782, which none of us at that time had actually read the bill. Well, after that discussion, I went home and read that bill. And frankly, what they're talking about is putting corridors near public transportation of multiple units. So basically building apartments which are currently zoned for only houses close to public transportation system, so people don't need to use cars as much. Because all of these problems we have, they're all interconnected. So none of these problems is in a vacuum that if we touch that one, it doesn't touch on other things. And, Mr. Lowe works a lot with transportation. Well, transportation is becoming more of an issue when the housing prices are driving people away from where they work. So now they're having to work further and further away from where they're supposed to be, and that's causing them more cost, more time. It's not good for the climate, for all the extra CO2 that has to be pumped out there. So changing the way we think about affordable housing, I think is really important, and we need to make room so that everybody has a place to live. Again, we have 22,000 people in our state with no place to live. That is not acceptable for a country with an economy that we have. We are so strong and so good at so many things. Affordable housing is something that we can solve. Part of that has to do with funding. Bob Hasagawa has been trying to educate people on the benefits of a state public bank that would fund affordable housing when banks won't. And there's a lot of commercial apprenticeships that are available so we can get more people in the construction trades and solve our skilled housing shortage. Thank you.
Mr. de Jong, bring it home.
No pressure. Again, thank you for putting on this, and it's good to see Claus and Sam. It's good to see you guys. What was not really dove into is this aspect in what I see is folks ask about, well, you're all about jobs, KARL. Well, what about the environment? Aren't those at loggerheads? And I say that is a false argument, because the green jobs, the clean economy, is not a novel concept. And we have been building solar panels. We've been working on wind turbines for years. And we need to open up those jobs to folks locally here so we can benefit our neighborhoods with living wage jobs, with jobs that provide economic security, the ability to cover your essential needs sustainably and with dignity. And we can do that. We're not stuck in making buggy whips. We have to continue to move forward for our clean economy, which this country is the leader. Just came back from a international trip, and I was shocked at the standards that we saw and where we usually elevate Scandinavia and other Northern European countries. And I can say with great confidence that the United States, especially in this area in Washington State, has very strong environmental laws, and we need to adhere to those. And let's keep those jobs here. And let's make sure that those are sustainable jobs for our family, and also that we have a better planet for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren moving forward. I believe that the 39th deserves that economic security. Thank you.
You're very welcome. The League of Women Voters appreciates these candidates for joining us, for running for office. A recording of this forum and others will be available on the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County website and YouTube channel. You can find links at lwvsnoho.org. Thank you also to the League team that made this forum possible, including backup moderator Nadine Shanti, timer Janet Kester, candidate coordinator and backup timer Shirley Buomo, and host and tech support Karen Crowley. We encourage our listeners to explore additional information about these and all the candidates. The Snohomish County voter pamphlet will be mailed to residences starting July 13th. Vote411.org, sponsored by the League of Women Voters, is another good source for nonpartisan voting information. Ballots will be mailed on July 15th. Election Day is August 2nd. Please be a voter. This concludes our candidate forum. Thank you all for joining us.